Hello, and welcome to the Write Club podcast, where we take you behind the pages and into the fascinating world of writing. I'm Beth, and this is Mary, and we're part of the team at Writer Magazine and Writers Online. Hi, Mary. How are you?
I'm really well, thank you. Let me tell you all about this week's guest. David Cairns, the Baron of Finavon, a Scottish title that goes back to the 13th century, has always been passionate about history and enjoys creating emotional connections with his writing. He trained as an accountant, he's a fellow of two institutes, and he moved into general management, becoming a technology entrepreneur. He has lived and worked on four continents. His latest book, The Case of the Hydegild Sacrifice, is out now.
Hi, David. Welcome to the Write Club podcast.
Good to be here.
Are you in your usual writing space?
Yes, I am. First of all, just let me say thanks very much for the invitation. I'm delighted to be here and share some time with your members. And yes, I'm at my normal writing spot here on the Gold Coast in Australia. I'm about 5 minute drive from the beach and about an hour south of Brisbane. And for the
Lovely.
for the record, it's been a very pleasant day with temperatures at about 27 degrees.
Oh,
Um, Having lived and worked in Scotland for a long time, you don't know how much I appreciate that.
yeah, I can imagine. Any of
Yeah,
us Brits are always very grateful to feel a bit of warmth, aren't we?
that's true. That's true. Yeah, I normally write in my study, which is where I am right now. It's a room in our house with a library of about 400 books, a desk, sitting area, where at times I go to sit and muse over my character's next steps. And it's a place where I can work in relative isolation, other than the occasional visit from one of our two shelters and cups of tea from my wife, Victoria. So
Oh,
I'm very
lovely.
much at home here.
Oh, and I'm really interested to know, did them 400 books come with you from Scotland, or have you collected those since Australia?
No, they came with me. They're mostly history and mostly non-fiction. So, for example, there's books on Edward the First, Alexander's, the various Alexanders, Robert the Bruce, William Wallace, um, Jacobite spies, and so on and so forth. So it's a great reference library that I use quite a bit in my writing.
That must have taken up quite a few suitcases, I imagine, to get over.
It certainly did. It had a container all of its own.
Wow. And we really enjoyed the case of Hydegild Sacrifice. Could you tell our listeners what to expect in this, the fourth installment of the Major Gask Mysteries, please?
Yes, certainly. I should start really by noting that all of my books rely heavily on researching actual events and real people. Then I weave characters into this story. So, in this book, as in other books, there are several real people who appear in the story, warts and all. And as several reviewers have noted, it's the fourth book in my Major Gask series. And although there are occasional references in the book to previous adventures, it can be read standalone without any problem. Uh, there are a few subplots and adventures, but the primary story is about the assassination of Abraham Lincoln in 1865. And when I started my research to be able to start putting the book together, um, I learned a lot. I learned a hell of a lot, actually, about what went on at the time that is just not generally uh, talked about or written about in contemporary or data today. It was actually the whole thing started with a conspiracy to kidnap him um, prior to 1865. And then in 1865 itself, there was another conspiracy to initially kidnap him, which ended up with his death. Um, I found, as one of my reviewers noted that, first of all, it is a riveting tale, but there are lots of unanswered questions and inconsistencies. For example, on the night that Lincoln went to the theatre where he was killed, he asked for a very strong guy to go along with him to act as his bodyguard. But he refused. Can you imagine that today? Somebody refusing the president to go along and act as their bodyguard. But he refused because his boss, Stanton, the Secretary of War, said he needed him to work. And subsequent research found out that they actually both went home that night. They didn't do any work. And there are incidents after incidents after incidents that come alight as you start going through the research. So, as somebody said, the case of the Hydegild Sacrifice gives you a history lesson, but it's also, it whitens your knuckles because there's a lot of activity going on too. The characters are also quite fascinating. We tend to think of the American political situation of that time as being a monolith, but there were several factions and factions within the parties themselves, which, as you go through and do the research and bring the story to life, just throws up lots of questions. And ultimately, the question becomes, who had benefited from Lincoln's death? The normal question that people ask when they write about this is, what did John Wilkes Booth do and how did he do it and how did they catch him? And that really is as far as most of it goes. But this book takes two characters who are unapologetically modelled somewhat after Holmes and Watson, and inserts them into this whole event activity. And in addition, they get involved with the Pinkertons. So you have this three-dimensional activity going on. So the book will take you through a journey across to America on the ship that incidentally was rammed by Captain Nemo in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, because he also used an actual ship. They meet the Pinkerton agent on the ship, a woman, and most people don't realize that Pinkerton hired female detectives as well, and Kate Warne in particular was the first female detective in America, and was a very, very good one too. And my two characters get to know Kate Warne and others, so there's a couple of female detectives involved in this as well, who are very sharp. So it's a story that by the end of it, certainly I felt that there was a lot of questions left. There was some moral ambiguities. There was a feeling that like you'd been on a roller coaster and you come off feeling a little bit exhausted by it all. But it is it's a genuine mystery mixed with adventure, and you're going to meet Abraham Lincoln and the ambassador of the time to the USA from the UK, and one of the big bankers of the time, and many other characters, as well as get to know Errol Raitt and Major Gask as well. So I thoroughly enjoyed writing it. So and I know some people have enjoyed reading it.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that, that it's such an exciting story and such great characters, but then also a history lesson. There was so many things that I thought I need to look up that a bit more, and I'm really interested in that now, and I had no idea about that. So, what is it about writing 19th century historical fiction that excites you in particular?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think first it was a period of huge change. The Industrial Revolution was happening then, and you were moving from an agricultural community with class system deeply entrenched to manufacturing and a new world with greater efficiency and capability, but enormous human cost as well. So the changes are worth writing about. They give you plenty to put your teeth into. But it's more than that. It's the fact that, this is really not that long ago. And things that went on then are tangible. You can write about the Roman invasion of Britain, for example, but it's an intangible story. You can write about Victorian era and what went on there, and you can just go out of your door if you live in the UK anyway. You can go out of your door and you can walk down streets that people that are in the story walk down. You can go into pubs that are still there. You can smell the smells of the time. So it's a very tangible environment. So it becomes much easier to create life and three-dimensional stories. I also enjoy researching the details because you're always learning. And you have to ensure that you are true to the time. So, for example, you can't have your characters crossing the Forth Bridge because it hadn't been built at the time. And by examining that, I found out that there was an ingenious ferry that used to go across to get from the south to the north of the Forth. And that's just one small example. So although the 19th century is distance, it's still close and it's tangible. So you can put yourself into the feet of people. In New York, for example, the research that I was undertaking, I knew New York would be very different in 1865. We all know that. But what I didn't realize that it was essentially north of Manhattan, really undeveloped, and there was horse manure everywhere. You would have people living in the most basic and horrendous of environments with cardboard over their roofs. And the smell was overpowering at times. So talking about that, bringing that, the smells, the noise, the environment into the story just gives you a backdrop that allows you to create reality. And I often say to people, I want to make my readers time travelers. And the best way to do that is you've got to assault all the senses, not just put words on the page. I guess the other thing about the period is that you've got such wonderful writers, contemporary writers like Dickens and Conan Doyle, that you can read and extract and maybe not copy, but to certainly learn from them to be able to create more verity about the period.
There must be such a huge amount of research involved with your writing. What comes first, the story idea or the historical context?
There isn't really a standard answer to that. I think in reality, and if I can just jump to the side for a minute, I find in every book that I've written that once I get started, the characters lead me to what's going to happen next rather than me taking them to where they're going. So what I find I do, as you've gathered with my library, I do read quite a bit, and I'm very embedded in what has happened in the past. And I have many views and ideas on the political worlds then and today. So I will quite often think about what happened in this period, what was going on then, and take an event and then start building from that event. So, for example, one of the books in Melbourne, set in Melbourne, involved a death on a train, murder on a train. And that came about because I was reading, I think it was a history magazine, and they were talking about the very first murder on a train in London, and how it was discovered, etc. Because remember, trains didn't really get going until the late 19th century, but there were trains in the mid 19th century. So I transposed that event to Melbourne and north of Melbourne because there was a lot of railway building at that time. And then the whole story just developed from that point onwards. So it is it's something that your characters tell you where to go, but also your generic reading, general reading takes you to places as well. So it is it's something that I guess makes writing the book just as much fun as reading it, because you're getting a new story told to you as you write it.
Mm. Yeah, we hear quite a lot actually from writers that a lot of their processes are we kind of just let the characters tell us what
Mm-hmm.
they want to hear, which is really interesting because I didn't think we would come across that as much as what we have. So yeah, no, that's fascinating. And how do you blend history with storytelling? It must be tricky sometimes to know where the sweet spot is between the two.
Yeah, that's a perceptive question, particularly when you're dealing with the 19th century. Um, Remember that it would take at least 3 months to get from London to Sydney, and not through a straightforward journey either. It'd be quite hair-raising. There were no telephones, there was no internet. It was a very different world in that respect, so it was much slower in many ways. Yet when you're writing a book, that's the last thing you want. You don't want it to plod along and become a test of endurance rather than something that's taking you through the period. So trying to figure out how to keep the story moving fast enough to keep the reader engaged, questioning what happens next and surprised, etc., etc. And then coupling it with, well, the governor wrote this letter back to London. It took 3 months to get there, a month to get answered, then 3 months to come back. 7 months later, you get a reply. But that's really tough, bridging those two divides. But I found that it can be done. It can be done, and hopefully I do it. But I do, and in fact, I've had a couple of people comment. I do spend time trying to build the experience, build the atmosphere. And for some people, that is a negative. They just want the story to clip along and go through to the end. For me, I don't believe that you can create an enveloping experience. You can't make your reader a time traveler unless they experience the three-dimensional world that you're talking about. You know, for example, we don't get smog in London today. But I'm old enough to remember walking home in a pea super in the East End of London when I was much younger. And I remember the ethereal quality of the night. You know, I couldn't see my hand in front of me. It was that thick. And I was walking along beside a park. And the hair-raising experience of hearing disembodied footsteps suddenly appearing and then disappearing. Things like that, as I say, you don't get today, was not uncommon there. And all other things around this create the experience that allows you to tell the story and bring your reader back in time. You've got to immerse the reader in the time if they're going to really become part of the story.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And in your recent article for Writing Magazine, you discussed building dynamic characters in historical fiction. Why is this so important? And can you give our listeners some techniques potentially that might help them in their own writing?
Okay, well, let me first of all say I'm still learning my trade and always will be. So I would approach any recommendation with a certain degree of humility in that respect. But I think I'd emphasize that there are no right ways and no wrong ways. But there's certainly some things that you do need to pay attention to. There was a friend of mine recently, they've started writing a book, and they wanted to write a book about transportation or people being transported to Australia. And she's actually from England originally. And in her story, she asked me, can you read a chapter so I can figure I'm on the right path? So I read the chapter, and I had to explain to her that they didn't drink mead in the pubs in 1883. They would drink small beer typically if they were poor. And it's little things like that. So another example is I had somebody proofreading one of my books, and they came back and said, oh, you need to capitalize the N in Northern Ireland. And says, no, I don't, because Northern Ireland didn't exist in 1865. It was all part of Ireland. So Northern is a small n, not a larger. So you can get into very finite detail about providing the verity within the story, because the minute you start slipping and inserting things that cannot possibly be true, you can lose people. So number one, if you're writing historical fiction, certainly research is really, really, really important. People have asked me, is there a best way to write? And some people set aside certain times, and other people find that it's easier to do it in the evening or in the morning or whatever. And I've personally found that it's all about writing when you're ready to write. And I can spend a whole day writing, and some days I won't write anything. It's all about what strikes you. And where you are in the story, you'll find that as you start developing the story, as I said earlier, the characters will take you along. And I find the further you get into the story, the more involved you become and the more time you spend getting towards the end. So I wouldn't use a regular regime. I would write when the muse catches you, and let your stories tell the story for you. Ask yourself the question, as you get through each chapter. So what would they do next? You know, that this has happened. So-and-so has said this to so-and-so. If that were you, if you were in those shoes, what would you do now? What's going on in the world outside? What would you do now? And that takes you to the next step. So that leads me to the next key thing that with any story, I believe, if you're writing fiction anyway. And indeed, even if you're writing a true story about people, is you need to have engaging characters. You know, a one-dimensional person is pretty boring in real life and in a book. And one of the readers early on in my writing career, not that it's been that long, commented to me that they like to see lots of dialogue. She didn't say why, but it's certainly true that the interchange between characters brings them to life, whereas a third-party description of that interaction is much more two-dimensional. So another thing I would recommend is that use dialogue quite a bit to engage readers and to develop the characters and show their personalities. I could go on, but another item, I guess, is pretty critical. If you're going to develop engaging characters, you typically need a villain. So writing about your heroes is fine, but don't forget you've got to develop the character of the villain as well. It's so much more satisfying seeing the villain get his comeuppance if you really understand what an evil person they are. So that's really important.
That's some great pieces of advice. Thank you. I wanted to ask you how your life experience working in all these different fields and living all over the world has helped or fed into your writing, do you think?
I think unquestionably it has helped. It certainly is reflected in my writing. I've lived and worked on 4 continents. I've run very large companies with thousands of employees, and I've invested money in and managed startups and grown businesses. So I've operated at all levels within companies. So I spent a lot of time working with people and getting people to perform well. And as I've said to more than one team in the past, look, my job is to get to the point where if I exceed my performance, is that I don't do anything. You do everything, because everything you do, you're doing because you know your piece of the business better than I know it. So my job is to coordinate and help you be successful. It's not to tell you what to do or show that I'm smarter than you are, because I'm not. So that experience means you have to spend a lot of time with people, understanding their characters, what motivates them, what doesn't. And all of that you can build into your character development, of course. Geographically, I know Miss Marple was able to solve all of her crimes through understanding the personalities of people in one village. But my experience is that around the world, the different cultures, different societies, different environments, different wealth levels, means that there's an infinite variety of people and the way they go about things and what is accepted within a society and what isn't. And when you're writing a story and you've got your characters jumping from Australia to England to Scotland to Ukraine to the USA, you've got to bring this in to again to create verity within the story. So, and certainly having walked the streets of Edinburgh late at night down the wines allows me to communicate that experience in a way that I could never do if I hadn't personally done it. So, yeah, I think it's had a major impact. And I doubt that I would be writing the way I do if I hadn't had the experiences I've had.
Mm. And when did you start writing? And could you talk us through your route to publication?
Sure. I can actually, well, to be fair, I've always been writing to a degree. I remember at school, I would write poems and stick them on the notice board, generally anonymously because they were satirical critiques of teachers. But so, and in my business career, I would write a fair bit, articles to newspapers, business magazines, etc., etc. But I didn't start on a career as an author until be about 5 years ago. And I can actually remember the specific moment when I decided to do it. My wife, Victoria, has forebears that were transported to Australia in the 1830s. Not together, they were Robert Bright and Mary Ann Golding were both separately transported, but in the same year. And they arrived in Tasmania and ultimately met. And a cousin of Victoria's had done a little bit of work trying to build her genealogy. So I knew about that. I got interested in that because obviously Victoria was. And from my research, I found that much of what her cousin had done was incorrect, actually. But in the process, found where they were buried. And they're buried in a cemetery in Amherst, which is north of Melbourne. And we decided to pay a visit. So we went over there, and one sunny afternoon, we managed to get to the cemetery and we were standing beside the grave. Names were still legible. There was a slight breeze. The trees were waving a little. There was a pinkish grass in the cemetery. And the grass was waving as the breeze came through. And I was looking down at these two names and looking at the people and thinking about what they would have gone through. And at that point, I said, I'm going to bring them back to life. I'm not just going to write a documentary. They were here at that time, there at that time, and in 1836 this happened, and so on. No, I'm going to bring them back to life. I want to breathe into this dying ember and create a fire again. So I spent the next year researching and discovered a lot of things. And then the following year, I spent writing what ended up to be a 2-volume book on their lives, a novel that obviously included my assumptions around what they might have said to each other and what they did, but was based upon the reality and the truth of their lives that I had been able to track leading up to the eventual burial of the two at that grave. And so that was my very first book. And I then wrote another book, which was about the gold escort robbery at the McIver goldfields, because I'd come across that in researching the Hellet's Tale books, which again, another true story, but build a story around it. And then having done those 3 books of true stories, I decided this is very constraining, because if you're telling a true story, you can't add fiction into it. You've got to tell a true story. And as a result, like everybody's life, there were periods where it wasn't particularly active and a bit dull and so on. So it was problematic getting through that. Whereas if you write fiction, you can do whatever you want to do and create whatever you want to create, so that the surprise is here, a mystery is there, and so on and so forth. So I said after that, no, I'm going to write this story. And I already had the 2 characters. If you drive from Perth in Scotland, which is where I lived for a while, if you drive north to Dundee, you'll come across a road sign that says Errol, 2 miles. And I thought, Errol, that's a neat name for a character in a novel. And if you drive towards Glasgow, there's another road sign, and so Errol Rate, and then towards Glasgow, there's another road sign that says Findo and Gask. So Findo and Gask are 2 villages near Perth, and Errol and Rate are 2 villages near Perth. And so that's how I got the 2 characters, and the rest you know about.
Oh, what an interesting way to come up with the characters. I like that.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And is there another book in the pipeline that you can tell us about?
There is actually. I've just finished it.
Oh, wow.
But it's a totally different take. About a year ago, a friend of mine, actually lives in Brisbane, but I've known him since I was 11, said, why don't you write something in the future, not just historical? Because he knows that, in fact, we both are very much interested in technology and politics and so on and so forth. And we've often pontificated on where the world is going. So, following his recommendation, I decided to take a break from the Gask Mysteries. I'll write more, but this one, take a break. And I've written a book entitled 2173. It's predictions about where current technology is going to take us, and the current social and political environment could take us. As I've said, I have a blog and I write on current events and future events too. So, for example, I predicted Russia's invasion of Ukraine a year before it actually happened. And earlier this year, I told my readers that this is my investment thesis for 2026, and we'll see how we do at the end of 2026. So far, we're ahead of the stock market. But, so this book, 2173, is what's going to happen because of artificial intelligence, neural chips, quantum computing, fusion energy, climate change, nuclear conflict, and the impact of the growing wealth and power gap and the greed of billionaires and technocrats and political autocrats. The book's title is 2173, subtitled The Ghost in the Machine, and it follows 3 people, 1 man, 2 women, how they fight against the system and where it takes them. So I hope to have that published probably in the autumn.
Amazing. That sounds fascinating. So we'll keep our eyes peeled for that one. And we always like to end the Write Club with a book recommendation for our listeners. Have you got something you can recommend to us today?
Oh, so many classics. When people ask that question, they normally expect to get a current book and understand that. But there are so many classics that people shouldn't ignore, like Foundation and Empire by Isaac Asimov, any Sherlock Holmes stories, Wilkie Collins' The Moonstone, any Dickens book, 1984, H.G. Wells, and on and on and on. And you could talk about classic adventures and thrillers today. I particularly like Dean Koontz writing, for example. But I read one book recently that made me think, and it's a recent book, relatively recent. It's a bit heavy, so may not appeal to everyone. It's a collaboration between a technologist and a sci-fi writer, and it imagines how AI could impact everyday lives. The book's name is AI 2041. It's by Kai-Fu Lee and Chen Qiu-Fan. I believe that AI is going to have a radical impact over the coming decades of society, on a par with the Industrial Revolution. So the better I understand its potentials and pitfalls, the better I'll be able to cope with it. And no doubt it will get fed into my futurist books, if not the historical ones. It's a very thought-provoking book, and I think it's very well written. So AI 2041 would be my choice.
Lovely. Thank you very much. And thank you so much for joining us today, David. It's been really fascinating. Nice to meet you.
Well, thank you so much for your time. I've enjoyed speaking with you, particularly across the miles with the wonders of technology, and wish you well.
Perfect. Thanks so much. It's been brilliant to have you on. And yeah, we'll look forward to seeing the new novel hopefully in the autumn.
Okay, I'll drop you a note when it's ready.
Yes, please.
Okay,
Thank
thanks
you.
again.
Thanks for tuning into the Write Club. We hope you enjoyed this episode and feel inspired to keep writing. Don't forget to sign up for our newsletter at Writers Online, your go-to for writing tips, competitions, and exclusive updates. Plus, you'll never miss an episode of the Write Club. Until next time, happy writing.